Welcome to another episode of Becoming a TechnoWizard. Just started reading The Design of Everyday Things finally, and sheesh, I didn't even get into the first chapter yet. I'm still in the preface, the preface, or however you want to call it, and it is phenomenal. Like I wanted to do a video just talking about what I learned and was thinking about as I was reading the preface. Um, because it's very interesting. So got the digital version, but so it starts off. This is the new edition, right? Um, he made the original one in like 2002, and what's interesting is he's saying here is that he didn't really change a whole lot because much of it is still accurate, right? It's still um, relevant. It's still highly relevant because he focuses on the psychology, right? He says he was originally going to call it the psychology of everyday things, but he realized that uh, it's hard to. It's like a design problem in and of itself, right? If it's something's called the psychology of everyday things, then the people that need to read it, like designers and stuff like that, might not read it. Most likely will not read it because they in the bookstores or whatever is going to be under psychology rather than design. So that's why we call it design of everyday things. But more, in addition to that, a bigger reason for that is because in his studies, when he initially set out to create like a psychology type of research book, he started realizing that a lot of these problems that we have in the world are not from the humans. Like a big interesting fact is that whenever we mess up with technology and we and it doesn't have to be high technology. It could be, doorknobs. Everybody knows him from, or a lot of people know him from the doors, doors that are done wrong, right? Like you'll know to push or pull that door, stuff like that. Um, a lot of people know him for that. They call him the Norman door guy. uh, but yeah, it's because, as he states in his book, just in the preface alone, um, it's not usually the human's fault, right? When something goes wrong, when they can't figure out how to use a certain technology, it's the fault of the designer, of the design of that object, of that product, of that service. Um, and a great, he did a whole bunch of examples for this just in the beginning, but he starts off talking about how he was like recruited to figure out what went wrong with the 3 Mile bomb, a 3 Mile, I don't know the exact name of the incident. But apparently there's like some maybe I'm shows my youth or whatever, but I don't know what that is. But I can imagine. Um, but yeah, he was contracted to try to figure out what went wrong here and why people were why they made this mistake, how this human error happened. But him and all his research buddies there, they found out that it wasn't their fault. Like the humans did everything they were supposed to do, but the machines themselves, like the design of the um the mainframes or whatever you call it, the components, the instructions, all of that was faulty, right? It didn't really make sense. Like, why you have all these different buttons, why you have these different ways of doing the same thing, or if this thing is important, why is it so far away from everything else, stuff like that, right? um but let's talk about the other things he did. I mean, the other examples he gave, because that might be easier for people like me to talk about and to understand. A great example is house thermometers, or even car radios, right? Um, like on a car dashboard, you have all these buttons going on here, and most of us don't know what everything does in our car. Like there's so many buttons, and half the time, it takes a lot of your attention away from the task of driving. So, messing around with the radio can be dangerous when you're driving. And the same thing for a house thermometer. It might not be dangerous, but at home when you're trying to fix, the temperature at home, a lot of us think, you just go in and try to hit the thermometer, hit the thermostat, right? Turn it up because it's too cold. Try to warm the house quicker. But that's not how it works, right? It works by explaining it. He kind of simplified it, and the house, or really most AC systems, work where they're only on or off. There is no number of measures. It's only on or off. So in most homes, when you turn the thermostat on, it's burning at full, is going at full power, and it just takes amounts of time to get to that temperature that you want it at. And what you're doing with the thermostat is actually setting the cutoff temperature. So when it reaches that, then it shuts off. So when you try to turn up the thermostat, you're not making it any faster. You're just moving the the temperature up to like 90 degrees or something like that. And then when it gets there, you're like, oh, why is it so hot? Turn it down, and you end up wasting a whole lot of power, electricity, and stuff like that. Just because most people don't know how the thermostat works. And that's not the fault of the humans. That's the point here. Most people think, oh, I can't use thermostats. I can't do this. You fix it. You do it, right? But it's not the fault of the humans. It's the fault of the designers of this technology, because the world works, how our world works is that we all have our own knowledge. Now, he didn't say this part in the book, but this is what I was taking away from it, is that we all have our own logic, right? Most people that are of sound mind, right, are logical creatures. We humans, most animals really are logical creatures. In order to be irrational, illogical, it requires you to be mentally unstable. Like there's something wrong with your brain. Most of us by default are actually very logical, very rational by default. That's how we work. You know. However, people do things that other people don't see as logical, because logic is relevant. I'm sorry, logic is relative. It's subjective. So we each have our own logical, ideas, because we each have our own minds. We each have our own brains, and most importantly, we each have access to our own sources of knowledge and sources of experience, sources of just intellect and stuff like that, right? We all are working with a different set of data, if you will. So whenever we're communicating with each other, we have to learn how to, one, communicate our form of logic to somebody else, and number two, get a little bit into their shoes and understand their logic, so that we can understand what they're saying and communicate back. So when you're inventing something, or when you're creating anything, when you're using any sort of object, when you're creating any sort of product or service, what you're actually doing is trying to abstract your logic into the world. And you do that by finding patterns between different people's logic, right? So I might have one way of doing things, you might have another way of doing things, she might have another way, that and for example. But once we communicate with each other, we realize that we have similar patterns in our logic. We can agree that, hey, yeah, I think that's logical. Do you think that's logical? Yeah, I think that's logical. And that's how we come to an agreement on what is logical on a general state. So when you hear somebody say, oh, they're stupid, they're illogical, whatever, they're rational. No, it's not that. It's that they're working with a different set of data. Simple as that. That data might be skewed, that data might be wrong, that data might be whatever, but they're still working on that data. For people to be illogical, it requires them to have, that's why I say, they have to have something wrong with their brain, because the brain is not able to be illogical. It can only work on a set of data. If you have 1 + 1 = 2 in your brain, you can't say 1 + 1 = 5. It doesn't, your brain won't work like that, right? It's not just going to come out of nowhere with this stuff, and just give you some random answer, right? It's kind of like a calculator. If you put 1 + 1, right, it's going to give you 2. It doesn't matter which way you see about it, that's what it's going to do. However, if you coded that calculator wrong, to where maybe there's a bug in there, and 1 + 1 = 85,000, then your calculator is broken. That's the same thing with us. Our brains are like organic calculators or organic computers. They run on a set of rules, and if you are not, if those rules are broken in our minds, that's when we do things that are really strange. However, usually when people say people are illogical or stupid or whatever, what they're actually referring to is the fact that they do not understand their logic, and And that comes from not understanding their data, their environment, the circumstances that brought them to make those decisions. And I say all of this because this is what I was thinking as I was reading this. He didn't talk about all that, but it allowed me to connect the dots between certain things, because they say a lot, design is all about understanding people, is understanding what people want, what people don't want, what their problems are, what their biggest problems are that they want to solve, what their needs are. And that all of that means all of that is just understanding people's logic, understanding the data that people are coming from. When you say, when the in your design process in the beginning is empathize with the human, the person that you're using, your user, right? And the importance, and this is why it's so important, because we all have our own logic. The process of empathizing is the process of understanding somebody's logic, understanding where people are coming from, their story, their environment, the data set. So that's why I love this so much, because in the preface, I still don't know if I'm saying that word right, but in the beginning of this book, he goes into that, in a way, or at least it encouraged me to think along those lines. And some other things he mentioned. Let me see. Yeah, so hidden frustrations. So yeah. On the topic of the fact that people blame themselves for when something goes wrong, right? When they can't figure out an object. And the reason for that is because that object seems like it has its own rules, right? And you have to figure out those rules. That's what people think, basically. And so if you can't figure out those rules, what do you think? You think I'm stupid. You think, you don't get it. You think you're not technical, or you're not this or that and the other or the other. That's not the problem. The problem is that somebody created that object. It's not like nature, this stuff, nature, it just exists and we live in it. We are a part of nature, and our job is to figure that out. But for the things that we create, somebody else just like us created that thing. They had their own set of logic when they created that thing. And so it was their responsibility to make sure that if they want other people to use that thing, then they have to translate their logic in a way that other people can understand. It is their responsibility. Whenever you're creating anything, it becomes your responsibility to now understand other people, how other people think, what their logic is, and craft your object, your product, your service, whatever, in a way that as many people as possible can understand what you're supposed to do with your product or service. And that that the idea just puts everything into perspective for me. So already, man, I'm already learning so much. I'm already thinking about so much. Not even in the first chapter yet. That's when you know you got a good book. People are like, oh, why you read the preface, the prologue, or whatever? It's because a lot of times it gives you a good context. It gives you a good idea of what's to come. It frames your reading experience. So if I would have jumped right into this, I probably would have missed this, right? Um, and we're gonna see what else we come up with. I'm not gonna read it live because you buy the book. um, but in the next video, I'll talk about what I learned in chapter 1. Let me see if there's other things to talk about, because I want to do several videos today, so I'm gonna keep this one short. But let me see. He has some set of design principles here. But he said he's going to talk about it in the rest of the book, so there's no point in talking about that right now. The only other thing is that, oh yeah, why design is so complicated, right? So he mentioned that the reason design is so complicated is because it is the confluence of a whole host of other industries. You can't be This is why we have such a problem in the industry today. Like, I'm only like a couple months into it of being a UX designer, not even in my first job yet, but I already see the sheer amount of like chaos, and ambiguousness that is in this industry in terms of the title design. Like, what does it mean to be a designer, right? When most people think about it, or a lot of people think about it, they think about art type of stuff, right? Like you being able to draw like fashion design, or you being able to, design a cool, like it's usually it's not exactly art, but it's connected to art. It's connected to aesthetics. It's connected to being able to create an experience that people like to look at or like to use. But what people don't realize is that there's a greater depth to that. The science. There's a science. There's a technology. There's a strategy behind the ability to design something that people like to use and look at. And the reason for that is because all of that is based in this responsibility to to communicate our different types of logic, right? So once again, if I'm designing something, I have to step out of my logic and understand everybody else's logic. That's why in the design process, man, it's just blowing my mind because everything's coming together. But that is exactly why in the design process, you have a stage where you're understanding the user, understand the customer, where you're doing user research, right? This is why this is the entire field of understanding people, because people are complicated. People, everybody has their own form of logic because everybody has their own data sets. Everybody has their own experience, their own environment, their own behaviors and all that stuff, right? And so if you're creating something, you have to understand that. You have to. There's no way around it. Like, if you're creating an object in the world, that object will not be able to speak for you. It won't be able to say, hey, do this, do that, do that. No, it has to say everything it needs to do in the form of the object. If it's a physical object, it has to the form of the object has to tell you what you can do with it. Like, there's a button here, huh? What does that mean? And I only know what a button is because we have like these logic patterns that has transcended kind of beyond our brains and into the physical world. Um, if you want to create a digital product, this is why this book is so relevant, still, because if it's even more important for a digital space. If you're creating a virtual environment or a website or something like that, you have to tell people what to do without actually telling them what to do. Like, you can't speak from the computer screen and be like, hey, this is my website, I want you to do this. There's going to be thousands, millions, maybe even, if you're popular, billions of people coming to your website, and they all will have their own logic, right? They all will have their own set of data sets, their own subjective realities of life, and you have to be able to communicate the very the frame of your website. You have to be able to communicate what you want them to do. And so that's why design is so complicated, right? And furthermore, there are different types of design. Every field has their own type of design. Engineering designers, you're going to design, in terms of more technical type of tools and mechanics and stuff like that. You get architecture, that's a whole different type of designing, all right? For buildings and whatnot. So yeah, there's it goes on and on, from art and media like movies and stuff like that, all the way to our devices, to our apps that we use and stuff like that. So of course it's going to be complicated. Of course it's going to be a lot to get into and a lot to learn, because there's a huge amount of history here, huge amount of science here, and it's your job as a designer to jump into it, to learn those lessons. But yeah, I'm gonna end it here. I want to do a video podcast, something talking about Jason Calacanis. So I love his podcast. I've been listening to his podcast, This Week in Startups, for years now. But he always kind of, I'm gonna say all right, because nobody gonna see this anyway. He always kind of finds a way to put his foot in his mouth, some way. He's an extremely intelligent person, extremely talented, um, extremely, forward thinking. But sometimes, like, the way he says things is like, dude, what? And it's interesting though, because he likes to learn. He's always kind of saying um, to learn certain things, but yeah. So I'm gonna do a video like reacting to one of his most recent things, because I've been wanting to do that, for a long time now, just like kind of reacting to his podcast and sharing my thoughts on what his thoughts are. And that's because, as a person who wants to be an entrepreneur and who wants to be kind of where Jason is now, um, I want to be able to think from his perspective, right? As well as to criticize from his perspective, because it allows me to think about things beyond my current data set. But it also, hopefully, this is my like my dream is that he can see things from my perspective, from people like me, right? And so hopefully that will help him as well. That will provide the value of him understanding other people's data sets, other people's psychology and understanding of the world, so that we can, grow better together. Because he has done amazing things, and so if he can adopt more of that empathetic standpoint, adopt more of that design, thinking of being able to see things from other people's perspectives, then I think he would be able to do a lot more good in the world as well. So yeah, I'm gonna do some video about that right after this, and then I don't know. We'll see if I have time to talk about Atomic Habits, the book I've been reading as well. So yeah, that is that. Hope you learned something, and let me know what you think as well in the comments below. All right. Have a good day. Bye bye.